Mr. Sanis, in connection with your grand jury testimony on that date, what role did Deputy U.S. Attorney General Guy Goodwin play?
Guy Goodwin, the United States of America, Deputy Attorney General, played no role. He sat silent. I testified to that federal grand jury without a question from the Deputy U.S. Attorney General. The U.S. Attorney General had been ordered to supply a Deputy U.S. Attorney General by the presiding judge of the 6th District Federal Court, William T. Beeks, in Seattle, after he had heard me telling about my work for the FBI. And when this grand jury testimony took place 4 days after Watergate break-in, I had to recount all of my work that I could remember on behalf of the FBI in carrying out bombing attacks, in planning bombing attacks, in obstructing justice, etc., etc., etc. For this, if they took the minimum counts or minimum sentences for each of these counts and added them consecutively, it had been well over 800 years. The Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Guy Goodwin, sat silent in that hearing room the entire hours of my testimony. Those records have never been unsealed, and they would verify my testimony if applied for under Freedom of Information Act by the American Civil Liberties Union or anyone who cared to. But Guy Goodwin sat silent. He, 2 years after this, almost, was part of the Watergate cover-up. And that's where I also know him from. He was one of those who covered up Watergate.
Mr. Sanis, do you think that any of the Watergate burglars or any of the Nixon White House plumbers knew that they were breaking into the Democratic National Committee offices as part of a conspiracy to cover up the truth of your testimony 4 days later to the federal grand jury in Seattle?
I am positive that none of those people, including E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy, would have known of that, because the conspiracy that I had entered into with agents of the FBI also went directly up to the level of and included the Attorney General John N. Mitchell of the United States under Richard Milhouse Nixon. And I knew that Attorney General John N. Mitchell and Nixon were involved in directing my activities, and as I found out much later, much later, from the theft of a document from FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. by people unknown to me, and which I will include as an exhibit to this discussion. It is a chart of my involvement and those that I reported to in the FBI, Burt Carter and Lewis M. Harris Jr., and my direct link to their supervisor in all of these criminal activities went to a man who we now know as Deep Throat, who was using Watergate to cover up the more deadly White House horrors. And I was the chief problem of the White House horrors. And that whole help by the head, the number 2 man of the FBI, but the head of counterintelligence activities in the United States, was to cover up his involvement, the man we now know as Deep Throat, and the involvement of senior FBI agents and of Nixon and of Attorney General John N. Mitchell in carrying out bombings, wiretappings, etc., 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 obstruction of justice plots to diminish the influence of, the credibility of, and members of the anti-war movement and people who were fighting for civil liberties in the United States, and to re-elect Richard Milhouse president for a second term in November 1972. What they wanted to do was keep the plot together enough until the election results were in, and then they had a whole series of spins that involved me in my testimony as being not credible because I was, at relevant times in the Vietnam War and my service there, an agent of the Chinese Communist government. That was their fallback plan if my information came out before the election. And what were they worried about? They were worried about a single tape recording that I had made of Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Seattle office of the FBI, Bert Carter, as he ordered me to commit a mass casualty terrorist attack on United States soil by the bombing of the Evergreen Point floating bridge, with sufficient explosives used by me to set one end of the pilings, break them off, and set free the Evergreen Point floating bridge where it joined the area of the University of Washington Arboretum, that area. To set that free, which would have broken the connection of the bridge at the other end and would have broken pieces into deadly last places of life for thousands of people who were using the bridge, and because I was to carry out this attack at a rush hour during high wind and rain moments, so as to create maximum casualties. As soon as I had that tape, I left working for the FBI and worked for a period of a great number of months before I went public. The reason for that was to try and stay alive. I was young. I wanted to live. I wanted to stop Nixon. I wanted to stop the FBI from committing crimes against the American people. But I did want to live. Now, I'm a man with many years. And on June 7th this year, I had my 8th stroke. I have not long to live. And as always, I'm willing to die for my country.